Ghost stories. We're drawn to them because they speak directly to that primal unease and rapt fascination we have with the unknown. There's something elusive and disturbing about a supernatural experience that sharpens reason while simultaneously calling it into question. What we relate to, what fixes our attention, is the rational mind struggling with what it can't explain. In fact, a ghost is only horrific in the presence of a witness who has had everything they thought they knew about the world called into question. Writers of the very best ghost stories know this and shift their focus so that the tales and what is troubling about them are less about the hauntings themselves and rather about the haunted. The Victorian period was lush with such stories, many of which were written by our most beloved writers of classic literature, Wilkie Collins, Bram Stoker, who we'll hear more from later this evening, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and more. So many of these stories have passed into the afterlife of public domain, and here tonight Teksteditions is pleased to resurrect a few of them in the collection Pillars of Mist. Charles Dickens, who wrote the world's most famous haunted man, Ebenezer Scrooge, begins a story collected here called To Be Taken with a Grain of Salt by discussing the effect a supernatural experience has on the rational mind and why sometimes that mind might be hesitant to talk about it. I have always noticed a prevalent want of courage, even among persons of superior intelligence and culture, as to imparting their own psychological experiences when those have been of a strange sort. Almost all men are afraid that what they could relate in such wise would find no parallel or response in a listener's internal life, and might be suspected or laughed at. A truthful traveler, who should have seen some extraordinary creature in the likeness of a sea serpent, would have no fear of mentioning it. But the same traveler, having had some singular presentiment, impulse, vagary of thought, vision, so-called, dream, or other remarkable mental impression, would hesitate considerably before he would own to it. To this reticence, I attribute much of the obscurity in which such subjects are involved. We do not habitually communicate our experiences of these subjective things as we do our experiences of objective creation. The consequence is that the general stock of experience in this regard appears exceptional, and really is so, in respect to being miserably imperfect. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, while mostly known for his detective stories, wrote a wealth of supernatural tales, many of which have been forgotten or outshined by his most popular creation, Sherlock Holmes. Though readers of Hound of the Baskervilles won't be surprised by his skill with supernatural fiction. Doyle wrote The Captain of the Pole Star in 1883, several years before the birth of Sherlock Holmes. It is the story of a young medical doctor aboard a steamship on a 6-month whaling expedition, which has become icebound in frozen Arctic waters, and discovers, or is discovered by, something else out there on the ice. The fate of the crew and its doctor are in the hands of a captain who seems to be going insane. September 12th. Calm, clear day, and still lying in the same position. What wind there is comes from the southeast, but it is very slight. Captain is in a better humor and apologized to me at breakfast for his rudeness. He looks somewhat distrait, however, and retains that wild look in his eyes, which a Highlander would mean that he was fey. At least so our chief engineer remarked to me. And he has some reputation among the Celtic portion of our crew as a seer and expounder of omens. It is strange that a superstition should have obtained such mastery over this hard-headed and practical race. I could not have believed to what an extent it has carried, and had I not observed it for myself. We had a perfect epidemic of it on this voyage, until I have felt inclined to serve out rations and sedatives and nerve tonics with the Saturday allowance of grog. The first symptom of it was that shortly after leaving Shetland, the men at the wheel used to complain that they heard plaintive cries and screams in the wake of the ship, as if something were following it and were unable to overtake it. This fiction has been kept up during the whole voyage, and on dark nights at the beginning of the seal fishing, It was only with great difficulty that men could be induced to do their spell. No doubt what they heard was either the creaking of the rudder chains or the cry of some passing seabird. I have been fetched out of bed several times to listen to it, but I need hardly say that I was never able to distinguish anything unnatural. The men, however, are so absurdly positive upon the subject that it is hopeless to argue with them. I mentioned the matter to the captain once, but to my surprise, he took it very gravely and indeed appeared to be considerably disturbed by what I told him. I should have thought that he at least would have been above such vulgar delusions. All this disquisition upon superstition leads me up to the fact that Mr. Manson, our second mate, saw a ghost last night, or at least says that he did, which of course is the same thing. It is quite refreshing to have some new topic of conversation after the eternal routine of bears and whales which has served us for so many months. Manson swears the ship is haunted, and that he would not stay in her a day if he had any other place to go. Indeed, the fellow is honestly frightened, and I had to give him some chloral and bromide of potassium this morning instead to calm him down. He seems quite indignant when I suggested that he be having an extra glass the night before, and I was obliged to pacify him by keeping as grave a countenance as possible during his story, which he certainly narrated in a very straightforward and matter-of-fact way. "I was on the bridge," he said, "about 4 bells in the middle watch, just when the night was at its darkest. There was a bit of a moon, but the clouds were blowing just across so that you couldn't see far from the ship. John MacLeod, the harpooner, came aft from the forecastle head and reported a strange noise on the starboard bow. I went forward, and we both heard it, sometimes like a bairn crying, sometimes like a wench in pain. I've been 17 years to the country, and I never heard seal or young make a sound like that. As we were standing there on the forecastle head, the moon came out from behind a cloud, and we both saw a sort of white figure moving across the ice field in the same direction that we had heard the cries. We lost sight of it a while, but it came back on the port bow, and we could just make out a shadow like on the ice. I sent a hand aft for the rifles, and MacLeod and I went down onto the pack, thinking that maybe it was a bear. When we got on the ice, I lost sight of MacLeod, but I pushed on in the direction where I could still hear the cries. I followed them for a mile, maybe more, and then running around a hammock, I came right on top of it, standing and waiting for me seemingly. I don't know what it was. It wasn't a bear anyway. It was tall and white and straight, and if it wasn't a man or a woman, I'll stake my davy it was something worse. I made for the ship as hard as I could run, and precious glad I was to find myself aboard. I signed articles to my duty on the ship, and on the ship I'll stay, but you don't catch me on the ice again after sundown."